Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. This is the Hanwei Raimei Katana, and before I get into the review, a couple quick things that you should know about the sword. First, it's a review sample. If you think that makes me biased, you know at the start it was graciously sent to me by the folks at Cast Siberia, so special tip of my hat and thanks to them for sending it my way. I'll also note that this is a geometry that I am partial to, in that it's got this big kind of wide blade geometry on it. It's a bit meatier than the typical sword, and I've wanted to review something like this from Hanwei for a minute now, so I'm glad that I have one from them to explore this geometry and why it's a little different. I will talk about it, but most of that in terms of why it's really different might come actually in a different video. The other bit that you should know, I study Japanese swordsmanship. You'll see my thoughts on using this as a practitioner later in the video. Know though that I don't fancy myself an expert, so if you're thinking about getting one of these for class, do consult your instructor before forking out any money. The last bit you should know is that this is about $300. At least it is as of the recording of this video. It's $330 in Cult of Athena right now. It might be more or less depending on where you want to buy your swords. This video, I'm going to cover bits and bobs and fits and features, so I'm going to go over all the little things and give you some close-up looks and tell you how they're fitting together. That way you can see the sword up close and you'll know if it's worth your hard-earned money regardless of what I say. So if you watch these videos with me on mute, I can't blame you. That's going to be the first part. I'll then do EI with it, practice with it a little bit, talk about how it moves around from the standpoint of just doing drawing and sheathing, kata kind of work, and then I'm going to do some cutting with it. I'll tell you how it cuts through the targets that I'm going to use on it, which are kind of the bog standard targets. I got some water bottles, pool noodles, and some tatami mats. I'm not bringing this sword to failure, and I think it's actually a good thing. It's not because I am infatuated with this kind of shape of sword, but more because I don't think people buying a differentially hardened sword in this geometry are going to go and whack metal posts in their backyard with it. I think they will do tamashigiri with it. That seems to be really what it's for, and that's where I think I can articulate the differences, and it's particularly useful as a sample to evaluate this geometry for future video and content. Anyway, that is what you can expect in the video, and the hope is that it helps you decide if it's worth your hard-earned money or not. So anyway, I'll give you my thoughts on that at the end. But for now, I'm going to go to the bits and bobs and fits and features. So starting off with the kasha, the end cap, this bit right here. First, we can recognize the theme of the set, and it has this kind of cloudy or wavy kind of looking theme. I don't know exactly which one it is, but it could be either one of them. And more or less, there's some detail here. It's subtle, but at the same time, it's a little bit more embellished than the practical series. This looks more or less like a slightly upgraded or different version of their practical line of swords, or Hanwei's practical line of swords, which if I compare and contrast right next to one, the practical line just doesn't have the same kind of embellishments on the fitting. So having a simple theme here is honestly appreciated. I like the little details. They're muted and subtle, but they have a little bit of zazz. They're not just plain. So it's one step above practical in this regard. Now it also transitions really well, and this is something I don't always see on Hanwei, where the transition lines up actually quite well, and the kasha has stayed on there pretty well. Now I have had this sword for around about a month, and I've practiced with it in class. I've brought it to a couple events, and it has not had a whole lot of use, but it has had opportunity to be bounced around in a bag, in my trunk. It's been used a lot, and the kasha is still on here, not wiggling at all, which is progress. It's also gone from very humid summer Minnesota days to more or less the freezer, which is my basement, and has held up there as well. So I'm glad that this isn't wiggling around is the point. Anyway, it fits well. I like the theme, and it's seated and aligned quite well. No hot spots or anything that I feel while holding it. If I move down to the handle here, the ito appears to be made of cotton. It has a soft feeling on the hands. It's a little different than the suede material that you find on a lot of the practical series. It's reasonably tight. I wouldn't say it's an A+. Bear in mind that like what this is being judged against is ito that I could stand on and not move. Now here, if I apply enough pressure, I can kind of get them to move, but it's tight for a reproduction sword. And more importantly, it doesn't feel like it's going to come loose or degrade in such a way where it's going to be a worry for me. These swords being around $300 is kind of in the budget realm of things. And if the ito comes undone, it can cost more than $300 to have it corrected or have it redone inside the United States. So if you're on a budget and don't have a lot of extra money to redo this, and also don't like gluing it together and want it to look nice, it's pleasant anyway that it is tight. The reason that it's important that it stays tight is it makes you feel also connected to the weapon, and it can be a costly repair. So overall quality on tightness here is good, and the diamonds also don't really bounce around actually a lot. They're not perfect, but overall for a sword in this price point, I'm actually surprised at how tight and clean and nice this is. The handle is on the beefy side. This is kind of I would say the X handle that you might have heard about from Hanwei, but at the same time, a little bit more refined. It thins out towards the edge here, and it's also not as girthy as some of the other axe handle swords that I've felt. So it's big to the point that I don't necessarily prefer this to the feeling of some other swords, but it is more refined than some of the handles that Hanwei have. If you prefer a little girthier handle, this is something that you will also like. We have some cloud or wave theme manuki that blend with the theme quite well, and they're sitting on top of some, unfortunately, artificial samegawa, or fortunately, it depends on which way you go on these things. So the artificial stuff doesn't stain as easily, it's cheaper, at the same time it feels plasticky, and I think cheapens the overall aesthetic. If I were to ask for any change, I think on this sword, it would probably be to have real samegawa here or nothing. But the fake stuff I don't personally like very much. At the same time, they do a good job of passing it by. It's not the worst imitation samegawa I've seen. It is, however, imitation samegawa. So shape-wise, it feels good. Do note this cotton substance as well has a tendency to absorb oil from your hands. I like the way it looks if you use it. This kind of worn looked cotton where it's absorbed a lot of stuff I think it ages with character, but do know it doesn't stay this kind of pristine as long. Any handle will do that, but cotton seems particularly susceptible to it. As I move up to the fuchi area here, again, thematically, we have this similar wave cloud looking thing, and it is also fit really well. It doesn't transition poorly, it doesn't overlap or bulge anywhere. This handle is one of the better examples that I've seen from Hanwei, so thumbs up. I'm also happy that it's on a relatively inexpensive sword. It seems pretty well executed. Now moving down from there, we have the tsuba. Again, just tasteful, subtle details here. We have this cloudy, wavy looking thing going on. I should probably figure out what it is before I do these reviews, but to me, honestly, it could be either one. It has a subtle, nice look and just a little bit more detail. The placement on these things is also nice. None of them grind on my finger, so if you tend to use the sword really choked up and have your hand kind of really nudged up right against the tsuba, nothing here really interferes and it doesn't cause any discomfort in motion. And I also like, again, that it's practical and simple, but has a little bit more detail, a little bit more pizzazz than what I see on the practical situation or on the practical examples, which are very similar in price point and very similar in the features they offer. Next thing to talk about is the habaki and seppa area. So the seppa are these little washers and the habaki is this collar here. So this is done in a silver color. I'm, again, thrilled by this. It is just not the same brass habaki that I've seen on Hanwei swords for so long. Even though it's a very simple shape and it doesn't have any embellishment on it, the change in color, I think, thematically goes really well with the sword, and it's just something a little different. It incidentally seats really well in the koiguchi area, the mouth area of the sword. It tensions about right in that if I push it all the way in and lock it in, it doesn't fall out easily, but a simple push of the thumb will deploy the sword. In terms of the saya, there appear to be, I don't know if it's horn or plastic, but something that looks a lot like horn and is fit really nice. A lot of times on $300-ish swords, the koiguchi doesn't look like it's fit particularly well. It looks like a lump of wood with some resin wrapped around it. This has a more traditional fitment on the saya, which is appreciated. There's horn on the kurigata, or something that looks like horn, and that's this little place where the sageo ties on, as well as on the kojiri, the end cap here. It has an ishime finish, which is like a stone kind of textured finish. For a dojo use sword, it's kind of nice. It doesn't show fingerprints particularly easily. The gloss examples from the practical series have gloss scabbards, generally speaking, and they show fingerprints a lot more. It just means you have to wipe them down a little bit more. There are silver kurigata in here, and also happy to say that they are fit in there. So if I pull the sageo around out of the box, the little kurigata don't pop out and scratch the scabbard up. The sageo is a reasonably nice sageo in that it, from a texture standpoint, feels nice. It's just a little bit on the shorter side. So if your ryu or the whatever style you study requires this to be longer or shorter, it may be something that you have to replace out of the gate. I wouldn't mind if they came with something longer, because it feels like you could cut them down and make them shorter yourself, but you can't really make them longer without buying a new one. Regardless, though, the quality of the sageo is pleasant. It doesn't feel like the same material that I see on every other sword out there. All right, now I'll talk about the blade, the pointy, stabby part. And the first thing I want to note is that it's a Shinogi Zakuri blade, and from a geometry standpoint, probably doesn't look all that different to what you're normally used to seeing when I hold it up alone. But when I hold it up next to the standard practical, you can kind of see how much beefier the Raimei is in its XL geometry format. So there are a few swords from Hanwei that are made in this XL geometry series, and it is wider in this dimension. It's probably about the same thickness, but it is a beefier sword and a preferred option when you talk about tamashigiri or people that are doing medium or hard cutting. They tend to be glorified lawnmowers, as I call them. It's a geometry that I'm a big fan of, but do know that it has this very wide geometry that's one of its prominent features. From the standpoint of blade geometry, though, Shinogi Zakuri, it has a Yokote on it. It's more or less just been polished the other direction. The lines are really quite clean. It doesn't show a lot of the same surface ripple that I've seen in other inexpensive Hanwei swords. The geometry came with a little bit of Niku on it. It came sharp, and I didn't have to do any honing or anything to get the blade to execute the cuts that you're going to see in this video. It's differentially hardened as well, and I wouldn't call the polish great, but I can, notice that there is a hamon in just about any light. It's probably not doing a great job in the light that I have right now, but in the right light you can make out a lot of little details in the hamon. It just requires some sunlight to bring out, but there's a lot of additional details there. If you have a handiness in polishing or can bring it out, I think there's some more detail that could be extracted from the hamon and make it look a little zazzier, but it's not done out of the gate. From a user standpoint, though, it came sharp and straight and good and tight. All of the things that are here are more or less what I would expect, or beyond what I would expect in a $300 sword. Now, and talking about using it, first let me talk about Iaido. So this is a beefier sword, and you absolutely feel that when you move it around. While it has a ton of authority in the cut, I can't say it's particular joy to move around from the standpoint of practicing EI. So if you're just doing that, the authority, it's on the very edge of what is comfortable, kind of teetering on clumsy. I'm not a small man, but I think most people smaller than me would probably still be able to move this around and likely have a similar opinion. Now, if you're going to do tamashigiri, where you're walking up to a stationary mat and you're executing a series of cuts, the additional authority that this has really lets you kind of focus on your technique and let the sword do some of the work. It's not going to do all the work for you, but it's at least more manageable if you're not doing hours of Iaido at a time. This wouldn't be a sword that I would choose to practice with. If I were going to class and practicing with the same sword for a couple hours in a row, it would wear my wrists out pretty quickly. It has a lot of authority in the cut, but it would wear me out, and I would maybe get clumsy with it. So I don't know that I'd want to do that. It's not to say it's impossible. Some people prefer training with a beefier sword. When I'm focusing on just my technique and drawing and doing things correctly, I would rather have a lighter tool to practice those things. And then I don't mind using a beefier blade when I'm doing cutting exercises. Sometimes I do prefer a heavier blade when training, but those times are pretty rare. I've got old joints and tennis elbow, and so I'm not trying to agitate those things when I'm trying to study Iaido. But when I go to the cutting side of things, the sword absolutely has the additional authority in the cut, and you really just don't have to do much to put the sword out there, and it does a fair bit of the work for you. So it is absolutely a joy to cut with, but it's harder to maneuver. So if I'm trying to be very agile with the sword, I struggle with it. And I can't tell you the first time I used the sword was at an event. So not perhaps the smartest idea, but my sensei told me that Raimei is actually the name of a cut. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be fun to try to cut with this sword? So the first time I really used the sword was in front of a live studio audience, and I was attempting a cut I hadn't attempted before, and it's a tricky cut, which frankly is beyond my skill level. So I failed it a couple times, but that was not the sword's fault. Later, when I got home and I was practicing on bottles, the sword is absolutely sharp. It's easy to index. It's easy to get the edge where you want it to go. It has a ton of authority in the cut, and it just sings through tatami mats. So it's a very, very capable cutter, and if you are looking for a blade for tamashigiri more exclusively, if that's something you're studying in class, a blade in this geometry in particular is one that I could easily recommend. But a blade like the Raimei is also one that honestly I like it a little bit more. As I again examine the old practical series, the fittings aren't bad. This is a really old version, but I certainly like the example on the Raimei more. I have as well another practical katana here, and this is the practical XL. It would probably be more or less the direct competitor to the Raimei, or another offering that would be enticing. And it has, some suede ito. It's a little different. The weight is slightly different, but the shape is very consistent. More or less, it has just a similar but somehow different look. And I honestly prefer the Raimei to the base level practical. So the additional details in the fittings, the silver, if I'm going to get the same blade geometry either way, I prefer actually the little extra details on here. Not a big fan of the fake Samigawa, but I'll take it with the extra details I get elsewhere. Anyway, that's what I can tell you about using it. It cut really well, and it absolutely excelled at doing tamashigiri. So if that's what you're going to do with it and you favor heavier swords, I think this is worthy of your consideration. All right, sword friends, it's time for me to answer the question, do I personally think it's worth it or not? And for $330, I would say yes. This is a sword that, to me, offers just some upgrades over the Hanwei Practical XL, which is one of my favorite swords from Hanwei. I have tighter ito, more consistent fitment, a blade with fewer ripples and consistent sharpness, and it has a little bit more authority in the cut than the other XL, which is kind of leaning into what this sword does well. Now, I don't think that it's just this sword. I think because Dragon King is taking over some of the manufacture of Hanwei, some of the nitpicks people have had over the years are getting addressed, and it wouldn't surprise me if the next batch of Hanwei XL and Practical lines that are coming in stock benefit from some of the improvements that I'm seeing here. But for $330, I have better looking fittings, I have a silver habaki, I have some other improvements in the hamon. I would absolutely recommend it. This is something I think I prefer over an old favorite, which is the Hanwei Practical XL. And if you're looking for a wide-bodied sword that's kind of leaning in towards lawn mowing or tamashigiri, this is an easy one to recommend. Now, if you're looking for just a sword for EI, and you don't like big heavy swords, you want something similar to an Yaito, this is not the one for you. But if you are going to be doing some cutting, specifically medium or harder target cutting, this blade is probably going to be one of the least expensive and most effective cutters that you can get out there. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I want to offer a special thanks to the folks at Kasabir for sending it over. I will follow up with some more content on why these are different and how they affect cutting when I have a chance to get several mats lined up and do some comparisons. I'll do that at a later date, but stick around if you want to see that content. It will probably happen at some point in the not too distant future. That's all I've got though. If you have any questions, throw them in the commentary down below. Cheers, and thanks for watching.